Go ahead, Commissioner.
You're on.
Okay. Good afternoon. Welcome to Thurston County Board of County Commissioners work session. Another one for today, Wednesday, January 13th, 2021, related to the Comcast franchise agreement. My name is Ty Menser. I'm chair of the Board of County Commissioners. We have Commissioner Carolina Mejia, County Manager Miro Chavez, Assistant County Manager Robin Campbell. One of our legal counsel on this, Ken Fellman. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Fellman. And I believe Commissioner Edwards will be joining us shortly. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah.
Okay. He'll be on imminently. So I'm going to let the county manager kind of frame. We have just a half an hour allotted for this.
No,
I did have an opportunity.
I think we have an hour, or it's 30 minutes. How long is it?
30 minutes.
30 minutes. Okay, sorry. Yeah, thank you. And let me begin, Commissioners, by stating this is in a way the last steps in a long, long road. We have kept you up to date as to how the franchise negotiations has been with Comcast. It has been a trying journey in a way. And not only that, perhaps we needed to engage the expertise of somebody who is well familiar with Comcast and this type of negotiations. That's what we embark to hire Mr. Fellman and his firm to guide us through. And also one key element of these negotiations, we approach these negotiations at the regional level. So the cities of Lacey, Olympia, Tumwater join on the effort to have a consolidated approach as to how we can do or strike a much better deal to our citizens related to the Comcast agreement. As any negotiations, it's always a give and take, and striking a balance as to how we need to move forward. So first of all, before I give the floor to Ken Feldman, I'd like to thank him to guiding us through these very complex issues. As many regulations change along the way, obviously the negotiations change their perspectives from the Comcast. And anyway, so here we are. Ken is going to walk you through some of the key elements of the proposal, and I did give you an opportunity to review his brief document that he shared with us yesterday. So I hope you had the opportunity to read that as well. They give you an overview of what he's going to be discussing today. So, Ken, thank you.
Thank you, Ramiro. Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, it's nice to be with you today. This is the second time I've had the privilege of working with Thurston County on a cable franchise. I did the last one with you, and again, in that case, that was also a collaboration between the county and the three other municipalities that we have worked with, and it has worked out pretty well as far as sharing of cost, and despite the fact that it took so much time getting it done in a more timely manner. The memo described a little bit about what the issues are and the framework for franchising and why it took longer than we had expected to get this done. I thought I would just go through that a little bit. I don't want to kind of read out loud everything that's in the memo, but I do know this is a public meeting, and that for anyone who might be watching, and I know we have at least one newer commissioner who this may be your first cable franchise renewal. So I'll try to highlight some of those key issues, and then certainly leave plenty of time for questions. We operate under a framework that is primarily governed by a combination of local and federal law. The state does not really have a role in franchising. And probably one of the most important things to remember at the outset is that under federal law, local governments are allowed to require franchise agreements and impose obligations and require franchise fee payments, so basically rent for the use of the public rights of way, from companies, but it's for the provision of cable service, which is the video services. We are not permitted to impose franchise obligations on the use of the rights of way for internet or voice services. While there is some ability to franchise those services under state law It does not come with the ability to impose franchise fees for rent. So while there's some governance of how the rights of way is used and why you sometimes are asked to approve franchise agreements for a broadband company, it's not nearly as comprehensive, and it doesn't involve the monetary compensation that a cable franchise does. But that also makes a cable franchise a little bit more complicated and more difficult to audit because cable companies, as you know, don't just provide video service anymore. They provide video and they provide internet, which is probably their most popular offering, and they provide voice service. So, and they do it in all these bundles of packages, and there are literally hundreds of them. You can buy a package that has a certain speed plus a certain number of channels plus voice, or the same two speeds and number of channels and no voice, or a faster speed but fewer channels. And just imagine all the different permutations of those kinds of packages. And if we were to audit, or when we audit, how much money the county is being paid, we need to unbundle those packages and figure out how much are they allocating to the video revenues, how much of those revenues are they allocating to the video services. All of that gets very complicated and was one of the issues when we did our audit at the beginning of the process that caused this to take a bit of time. We do this in an informal negotiation. The federal statute that constrains what we can require in a franchise has a process for a formal franchise renewal. Usually that only happens in rare occasions when there is a dispute that cannot be resolved informally. And oftentimes when it has happened in the past, it's led to litigation between a local government and a cable company. So we try to avoid that. With that background in mind, we have a couple of key provisions that are in this franchise. One is we have an updated definition of gross revenues. I gave a little bit of background about how hard it is to audit these things and the unbundling of these services. We are limited to charging 5% of gross revenues for franchise fees, and we now have a definition of gross revenues that is a little bit broader and more all-encompassing, which means gross revenues will be a little bit bigger than they would have been. That means the 5% share to the county will be a little bit bigger. In the audit section, we have better language on document requirements, documentation, retention requirements. One of the hurdles we had at the first part of this process after we did the audit was that some of the records that dealt with how Comcast was bundling these packages of services didn't exist anymore. They periodically change how they internally allocate these bundled packages of cable and non-cable revenues, and when they move on to their next way that they allocate, sometimes they don't keep the old records of how they used to allocate. And that had happened here, and some of the records weren't available. We now have language that requires records to be kept even when they have to change, or even when they decide to change how they do their allocations for the minimum period of time in which the county can do an audit. So if we do an audit in the future, we know the records will exist, we'll get more accurate results. There is language called competitive equity. This is an outgrowth of what used to be called level playing field language. That can best be understood if you have a franchise with one company. Level playing field means if somebody else wants to get a franchise, they can, but it has to be the same terms and conditions. The FCC has preempted those kind of level playing field requirements because they say it's anti-competitive. And what Comcast and others in the cable industry have done in response to that is they've come up with this new concept of competitive equity. Competitive equity basically says if somebody else wants to compete with us, you can give them whatever terms and conditions you want. But if we think that they're substantively better than what we have the right as Comcast to come in and make you amend our franchise. The way that initially started, what Comcast proposed was language that was could be acted on unilaterally by them to make the county change the franchise. That has been changed so that it's not unilateral. We get to negotiate it. They have to demonstrate to us why they need new language. We don't have to accept their word. We can negotiate further, and parties reserve their rights to a court action if it were to come to that. It's unlikely this would ever kick in because we really don't have cable competition, even though we're not allowed to preclude it and grant exclusive franchises. It costs a lot of money to build a cable system. So the market kind of creates a de facto monopoly. But should it ever happen, we have better language there to protect the county. We have some new insurance language that, frankly, the municipalities that we worked with through their membership in the Washington City's Insurance Authority, WCIA, had recommended some basically updated insurance coverage language, and we negotiated better coverage in the franchise there. And the biggest issue probably that we spent the most amount of time on was the PEG channels, public education and government access channels. You have a relationship, as do the other communities, with Thurston Community Media. That's been in place for a long time. And we've had standard definition channels. Under the new franchise, we will get high definition channels. It will take some time to upgrade the infrastructure to allow high definition signals to be sent over the cable system. But once that is done, we will be able to broadcast council meetings and other county access programming on high definition channels. That also was the cause of some of the delay in our negotiations, because frankly, the other thing that Comcast had decided to do here was to end its agreement to provide free lease space to Thurston Community Media at the Yager Way facility, and which Comcast is now allowed to do as a result of some of the changes in federal law. The local governments were not willing to pay market-based rent for TCM. We're not sure how TCM is going to be able to come up with rent. They may work out a deal with the landlord of that building, but that's kind of a separate deal. But we waited for a period of time to see if that could be worked out. And when it looked like it wasn't going to be worked out anytime soon, we decided to go forward. And we were able to negotiate with Comcast that Comcast would continue to provide free space to Thurston Community Media at least through next December. And at that point, TCM is going to have its other options in place. The other thing I wanted to mention to you, and this probably won't come as a surprise, we have, as local governments, continually faced battles at the Federal Communications Commission and in Congress, fighting back federal preemption of local authority. And in the cable world, that has been going on for many, many years. The FCC came out with a decision in 2019 that limited the kinds of benefits we can obtain in a cable franchise at the cable operator's expense. As an example, one of those is we usually see cable companies providing free service in public buildings, free cable service. We can't get that anymore. The cable company is allowed to either charge a market-based price for that or deduct a marketplace price from the franchise fee revenues. So we needed to come up with some language to incorporate the new preemptions that the federal government has imposed upon us. That FCC rule, by the way, is being challenged in court. The case is briefed. We're waiting for a date from the court to get oral argument. And the law could change. Congress could change the law. The court could overturn the FCC rules. And we were able to negotiate language in the franchise that if the law changes, the county will be able to unilaterally change the franchise back to reassert those kinds of benefits that the FCC took away from us last year or a little over a year ago. So with that in mind, I'll probably, let me close there, see what questions that you might have, and I'm happy to provide any additional information you might need.
You're muted, Commissioner.
How about now?
I can hear you now.
I'm muted. Sorry about that. Commissioner Edwards, go for it.
Well, I looked at material over that Romero gave us, and I have to say, I don't know that I understood it all, so I'm probably going to defer to my seatmate who understands that lingo better than I do. But I do have a question. You said next December, that was the local TV channel. Did that mean this year or next year?
This year, 2021, so 11 months from now. The agreement was that Comcast initially proposed that TCM start paying market-based rent, or if they couldn't pay it, that the jurisdictions pay it for them back 6 or 8 months ago during these negotiations. And they said even in that case, they were still going to vacate these premises and kick TCM out as of December of 2021. We pushed back pretty hard on that and eventually got Comcast to agree that, all right, they can kick them out and end their lease with TCM as of December of 2021, but they would continue to allow them free rent, and Comcast would incur that expense and not charge it back either to subscribers or to the jurisdictions in the interim. So it's this year, 11 months from now.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Mejia, anything on this?
I have no questions or comments at this time.
Yeah, I read I don't know this area at all. I do have a legal background, but this is not anything I worked in. So I read your memo very carefully just because I was interested and I didn't have the background. So it pretty much answered the questions, and you've highlighted the key elements here this morning, or this afternoon. So, you know, it looks like we still, you know, we were hoping to resolve the PEG issue, and it looks like it's not resolved, but that's not something that we're going to solve today. So I don't know that I have really any other questions about it. It looks like that you addressed the key issues in the best way for the county, and you know, from what I can tell. Ramiro, do you have any questions or comments about it? You probably know more about this than all of us.
Just maybe a couple of comments. Can touch base on the HD channels, and he stated when the infrastructure is in place, we'll be able to access. That infrastructure needs to be covered by the local jurisdictions. That was something that it was negotiated as part of this agreement, as far as I understand. But also the TC Media lease, and we provided some perspective to the board as to what the consequences of that is. At the end of this year in December, absent the local jurisdictions paying for the lease, which is $200,000 plus or thereabouts. So it's significant. It's a significant amount of money. And as you may recall, we're going to be embarking on just looking at the services as an overall for a public television that provides services to local governments. So we're going to be bringing you a proposal maybe in a couple of months for you to consider issuing a regional request for proposals to secure those services before the December 2021 will be. So we're going to be bringing a whole package of information for the board to consider, and this will be the same information the cities of Olympia, Lacey, and Tumwater will be facing as well. So there is a regional approach to this, and that will be, it's not associated with this franchise agreement per se, but the TC Media issue will be something that will be evolving this year, and certainly the board will be in the position to provide direction on that as well.
And have you done presentations to the cities yet?
Yes and no. Lacey is next week. Olympia went last night, and I'm going to update you on one of the issues that you raised that was discussed last night. And Tumwater was about a week and a half ago, and they specifically asked for no presentation. So I think they passed it without any presentation. In Olympia last night, Deb Vinsel from Thurston Community Media indicated, well, first, Hans Heckman from Comcast indicated this is a rented facility, and Comcast doesn't want that facility anymore. So I think they're moving out. Deb Vinsel from TCM said they have just started negotiating or opening discussions with the building owner, and they think there's a way they're going to be able to work something out to stay there. Now, does that mean they may come back and ask for additional money from the county and the cities? Maybe, I don't know. But she said they're starting that process, and presumably as they get further into it, you may hear more from them about how that goes. And the one other thing I guess I wanted to mention to piggyback onto Ramiro's comment about the return lines and that it being a cost to the jurisdictions. One of the things the Cable Act allows the county to do is to impose, in addition to the franchise fee, an obligation for Comcast to pay to the county certain amounts to cover capital expenses related to PEG operations. So we have a PEG fee in addition to the franchise fee that generates revenue for each of the jurisdictions, and it can be used on cameras, it can be used on studios, it can be used on any kind of capital expense related to the channels. So we've negotiated for those PEG expenses to, for a period of time, to come in and then go back to Comcast to pay for these upgrades they're going to have to do. So it's not going to be that the county's going to have to write a check to upgrade the infrastructure in order to allow for high definition. It's basically this fee that Comcast collects from its subscribers. It's going to retain some of that fee for a period of time and use it basically to reimburse itself for the cost of the upgrade. So the real people who pay for that upgrade are the subscribers to Comcast.
But in a way, it's a reduction of the PEG fees that come to the county.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, and that is really the gist of this, although I know that the county is not going to be paying directly, but it's a reduction on the PEG fees. Otherwise, we could have used it on a different way.
Right, right.
Did you get any questions from Olympia about any concerns from their council members or staff?
Not on any of the issues that we just discussed. They have a couple of council members who asked questions and expressed some frustration that, you know, the primary interaction that most people have with a company like Comcast is for their internet service, especially in light of the pandemic and the demonstration throughout the country of how important broadband connectivity is. You know, there was just some frustration expressed that as a local government, we have less and less control over that. And all I could do in that kind of a case is to share the frustration and remind everyone that it's been Congress and the FCC, and in some sense our state legislature, that has created that situation. I mean, clearly all these companies use public rights of way to generate profits for their company, and to the extent that good policy means they should be paying local citizens some compensation for the use of that public property, that would apply, in my mind, whether it was broadband or whether it was cable. But until the state or the Congress changes the law, we're kind of stuck there. That, frankly, was a significant part of the questions in the discussion that were raised in Olympia last night.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think I'm good. Commissioners, any final questions?
Not for me.
Hearing any. So, Ramiro, what's our next step on?
So next step, you will see a formal AIS for you to consider formally approving the franchise agreement. So we'll work on a proposed resolution to do that. So that's the next step. Go ahead.
If I'm sorry to interrupt, if I could, Mr. Chairman, just one other information point. Well, two short ones. The franchise that you have in front of you was completed in December. But it had a date on it for signing and a term date. The section on the term was that it would go on a certain date in 2020 to 2030. I just sent to Grace O'Connor today an updated version of that. The only thing that's changed is it goes from 2021 to 2031, and the signature block dates say 2021 instead of 2020. So she will have the most updated version when it's brought forward for final approval. You will use that document. The only other thing I would say, and Ramiro and Robin know this, but I want the commissioners to know, it's been a real pleasure to work with your staff. Michelle Underwood when she was here, Megan Porter now, and Grace in the prosecuting attorney's office really represent you well, and it really makes my job easier when I have great colleagues that I can work with. So I hope you are all very proud of them.
Yeah, Megan's in the room, so thank you, Megan.
We are very proud of them. Thank you.
Good.
Okay, with that, Ramiro, should I adjourn? Yeah.
Ty?
Commissioner Edwards.
One just quick question for Ken. Do any jurisdictions allow for any type of commercial advertising to pay for this type of shortfall that they're running up against now?
That's a really interesting question. The requirements in the franchise for the use of the PEG fee are for non-commercial, it's to be used for, or the PEG channel rather, to be used for non-commercial purposes. To the cable company, that means no kinds of advertisements of any kind. But if you read the case law, and there's not a lot of case law, and you look at the history of cable franchising, it doesn't happen too frequently. It used to happen more frequently. My opinion is that if you were to do sponsorships similar to public television sponsorships, where you have somebody donate a certain amount in order to, get in 2 or 3 minutes about highlighting their business and being thanked as being a sponsor for public or government access television in Thurston County. I think that kind of sponsorship and revenue generation is absolutely legal. It just does not happen very frequently, and the cable company probably would respond and say, "You can't do that." So that's my take on it.
Okay, more to come. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, thank you so much, Ken. Appreciate that. With that, we're going to adjourn this, and in 3 minutes, we have yet another Zoom on another topic. So I'll see you guys
All
there.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.